Estrogen and progesterone are the female sex hormones, and they're produced mainly by the ovaries, which are the female gonads. Now, the female body is very clever, and it can synthesize 3 types of estrogens. These are estradiol, estrone, and estriol. Of the 3, the ovaries synthesize estradiol, which is the most biologically active of them all. And estradiol accounts for the majority of sex-specific changes that begin at puberty. These are things like monthly ovulation and menstruation, as well as the development of secondary sex characteristics. So, small amounts of estrogen are actually also produced by the adrenal cortex and the fat cells and adipose tissue. And during pregnancy, the placenta secretes these hormones as well. But during the reproductive period, it's the ovaries that produce the majority of estrogen and progesterone in the female body. So, back before puberty, the hypothalamus secretes small amounts of a hormone called gonadotropin-releasing hormone, or GnRH. And that GnRH travels to the nearby pituitary, which secretes 2 hormones of its own. These are follicle-stimulating hormone, or FSH, and luteinizing hormone, or LH. Once puberty hits, the hypothalamus starts to secrete GnRH in pulses, sometimes more, sometimes less. And in turn, the FSH and LH make the ovarian follicles develop and secrete hormones. The ovarian follicles are scattered throughout the ovaries, and each ovarian follicle is made up of a ring of follicular cells surrounding a primary oocyte at the core. As the ovarian follicles develop, the follicular cells differentiate into theca cells and granulosa cells, which ultimately synthesize progesterone and estrogen, respectively. Now, how much of these hormones is secreted is directly related to the phases of the female menstrual cycle. The menstrual cycle lasts 28 days on average, and it's centered around a surge of FSH and LH which happens on day 14, and that's what makes ovulation possible. The variations in FSH and LH levels results in fluctuating levels of estrogen and progesterone, and they vary according to the phases of the menstrual cycle. The 2 weeks before ovulation are called the follicular phase, and in this time it's mostly estrogen that's produced. And then the 2 weeks after ovulation are called the luteal phase, and in this time it's progesterone which is the dominant hormone. During the follicular phase of the menstrual cycle, estrogen makes the superficial layer of the uterus, called the endometrium, thicken up and sprout progesterone receptors. Also during the follicular phase, estrogen acts as a negative feedback signal, making the pituitary secrete less FSH as estrogen levels rise. And then, right before ovulation, the really high estrogen levels make the pituitary much more sensitive to the actions of hypothalamic GnRH, and so they turn into a positive feedback signal, leading to a massive surge of FSH and LH, and that leads to ovulation. Then, when we get to the luteal phase, progesterone binds to receptors in the endometrium, and that stimulates the endometrial glands to produce more secretions that prepare the uterus for a potential pregnancy. Progesterone actually acts as a negative feedback signal during this luteal phase, so the pituitary secretes less LH, and in turn, the levels of progesterone decrease as well. And then menstruation follows. Okay, so things are going to get pretty intense in this scene, and I'm going to need you to bear with me with the long words. I hope you're sitting comfortably. Okay, so let's start easy. Both estrogen and progesterone are steroid hormones, so their production starts with cholesterol. Cholesterol reaches the theca cells, and inside there's an enzyme called cholesterol desmolase. That wasn't too hard, but you just wait. So cholesterol desmolase converts cholesterol into pregnenolone. But there's another enzyme in the theca cells, and this is really catchily named 3-beta-hydroxysteroid dehydrogenase, which just rolls off the tongue. Anyway, that does the job of converting pregnenolone into progesterone. Now this is where the pituitary gonadotropins come into it, because LH, if you remember that old chestnut, stimulates the proliferation of theca cells, and so it makes cholesterol desmolase convert more cholesterol into pregnenolone. So overall, LH actually stimulates progesterone production. Progesterone is then released into the blood, bound by plasma proteins like albumin and transcortin, and it's transported to target tissues. The remainder of pregnenolone is converted to 17-hydroxypregnenolone, and then into dehydroepiandrosterone, which I definitely think we should just refer to as DHEA. Now, 3-beta-hydroxysteroid dehydrogenase is quite the overachieving enzyme because it also acts on DHEA and converts it into androstenedione, a testosterone precursor. Androstenedione diffuses to the nearby granulosa cells, which have two enzymes of their own. The first is 17-beta-hydroxysteroid dehydrogenase, which converts androstenedione into testosterone, and the second is aromatase, which converts testosterone into 17-beta-estradiol, the most biologically active type of estrogen active during the reproductive period. Now, FSH makes aromatase work overtime. 17-beta-estradiol is then released into the blood, where it's bound to a plasma protein called sex hormone binding globulin, or SHBG, and that carries it to the target tissues nearby, such as the uterus and the vagina, and to the other cells and tissues in the body which respond to estrogen stimulation, such as the bones and the blood vessels. Now, both estrogen and progesterone have local effects, meaning that they act on the organs and tissues nearby, as well as systemic effects, meaning on the rest of the body. Starting with puberty, estrogen and progesterone are responsible for the maturation of the female reproductive organs. These are the fallopian tubes, the uterus, the cervix, and the vagina. Estrogen is also responsible for female secondary sex characteristics, like widening of the hips, growth of the breasts, as well as distribution of the fat to the buttocks, hips, and thighs. On a systemic level, estrogen is lovely because it has a protective effect on the cardiovascular system, helping keep the blood vessel walls nice and flexible to accommodate blood flow, and also protects against cardiovascular disease by lowering levels of LDL cholesterol. Estrogen also protects the skeleton, where it helps to sustain bone density. Progesterone, for its part, also plays a role in bone strength, as well as maintaining skin elasticity. Now, during pregnancy, we have a new ruler, the placenta, which takes over estrogen and progesterone secretion, both of which are required to maintain the pregnancy. But there's a twist. The placenta actually produces estriol rather than 17-beta-estradiol, so estriol becomes the dominant type of estrogen. Also during pregnancy, estriol and progesterone help to prepare the breasts for lactation after delivery. Now, another plot twist occurs during menopause, which usually happens around age 50. At that point, the ovaries run out of functional ovarian follicles, so there's no theca or granulosa cells to produce any more hormones. That leads to a decrease in estradiol levels, accounting for many of the symptoms preceding menopause, like hot flashes and night sweats. But some estrogen is still being synthesized. Remember I talked about those fat cells and adrenal glands? Well, that's where estrogen is still being produced in a menopausal woman's body. However, these tissues produce estrone, so after menopause, estrone is the dominant kind of estrogen. Okay, so we've covered everything. Let's just go over the key points quickly. Estrogen and progesterone are the main female sex hormones, and they play a crucial role starting with puberty. During the reproductive period, theca cells secrete progesterone and granulosa cells secrete estradiol. However, during pregnancy, the placenta secretes estriol and progesterone, and after menopause, fat cells and the adrenal glands produce small amounts of estrone.